Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Sammy Raw.
And I'm Rosie Murphy, and this is the podcast where we have talked for the last 6 years about Lost.
6 years. It's taken us as long to make this podcast as it did for them to make the television program Lost. But we are here and ready to do it one last time.
We are so glad that you are here with us in The Hatch. Let's get started on the end.
Yes, thank you as always for being with us here. We're doing the finale of Lost. We've got Jack Bender back on the program. You heard him last episode. You heard him back at the beginning in season 1. He was one of the people most involved with making Lost as good as it was. He's a big reason for that, and we're excited to have him back on the program.
And he directed the end.
He did direct the end.
We start every episode of The Hatch with hot takes from Sammy and I, as well as from you all. We asked you last time to call and leave us your hot takes, and boy, you did. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we got a bunch of good ones to play, and we're going to start now with a selection of a couple of folks who wanted to share just why they loved the finale as much as they did.
Hey guys, it's Cassidy from Portland. I think those two Lost references in themselves are pretty great, but I love your podcast, and I wanted to fulfill Rosie's request of sending in those hot takes. This is the second run through that I've watched Lost because of your guys' podcast. And one thing that I thought was really interesting was the first time I watched it, I really didn't love the finale. I had kind of just been through some trauma myself, and I wanted that resolved and that problem solving, those answers that everyone was looking for. But watching it again this time around has really changed my mind, and I really kind of feel that warmth and that comfort and more of that closure in Jack's death that I think, you can see on his face in the finale. He's there with his friends. The lighting is really warm and comfortable. And I think that's one of the biggest differences for me watching this show the second time around, is that the most controversial opinion about the finale is what changed for me.
Hi, this is Nehla, and I didn't watch all of Lost until a couple of years ago after I heard for over a decade that it sucked, that the finale sucked, and my hot take is that it's actually a perfect finale for the show that it was, and I thought it was perfect for wrapping up all of the storylines that were happening over the last 2 seasons of the show, and so that's my hot take.
Hi, my name is Colin. I've watched Lost like a million times, and my hot take for the series finale, is it was the weirdest prequel to The Good Place I've ever seen.
Yeah, hi, this is Dave with one more hot take. I think the people who hated the finale generally were the ones who were more intrigued by the island than by the characters. I loved the characters and loved the finale. I watched it tons of times, skipping over the island stuff so I can rewatch how all the Flash Sideways ended. I think we dream about overcoming whatever failings we have and being with our loved ones when it's time to move on, and I think they did a great job with it. I think you did a great job with the podcast, too. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye.
Cassidy, Noah, Colin, Dave, thank you for the hot takes. And I just want to say, responding to Dave's take there at the end, I think he's probably onto something that you had people who were relatively more intrigued by the island, people who were relatively more intrigued by the characters and their stories. And it's not that I didn't love both, because I certainly did, but I think he's probably right in that distinction.
Yeah, I agree. Let's play a few more.
Hey, Sammy and Rosie, it's Audrey from Canada. First of all, thank you so much for all your hard work through all these years. The podcast is truly amazing. For my hot take, I just wanted to say that I personally love the finale. I think it really took the time to say goodbye to all our beloved characters in such a way that felt genuine and, most of all, hopeful. After all they've been through, it really felt hopeful, the finale. The last line from Luck to Jack, "We were waiting for you," is so heartwarming. They were all waiting to move on together, which is simply lovely. At the end of the day, all we can ever hope, in life is to have people waiting for us at the end. And I think Lost really encapsulates the feeling beautifully. So that's it. Thank you again for everything. Namaste.
Hi, Sammy and Rosie. This is Owen here. Can't wait for the finale. It's been an unbelievable journey. My hot take is related to the lines from the finale. So I love the line from Kate and how Evangeline delivers, "I've missed you so much," a line which actually repeats very similarly in Ant-Man and the Wasp. I suppose it just shows that she lived a long life, Jack shepherdless, and it was very emotional. I also liked the fact that Jack's last line is, "I'll see you in another life, brother," and he says it to Desmond. And I love the fact that John Locke gets the last line in the whole show. Because as good as the Man in Black is, I think we all missed real John Locke in season 6. And although he was in the Flash Sideways, I think the island missed him. But at least we got our spiritual leader in Jack Shepherd.
Hey guys, it's Sean from Ohio. So my hot take is with regards to something that I don't think got talked about enough on this podcast, which is the music. Over the course of the show's run, Michael Giacchino went from a relatively unknown composer to scoring some of the biggest blockbusters in Hollywood, and he totally could have phoned it in for the last season of Lost, but he didn't. I think that he saved some of his best work for the very end. There's so many emotional beats in this episode that land so well thanks to the music. There's the montage at the beginning with Christian's coffin being unloaded at the airport. You hear the theme from the raft from the season 1 finale play as the Ajira plane takes off. And then there's the medley of different themes in the final moments of the episode as they all gather in the church. Like you hear Hurley's theme and Jack's theme and the life and death theme and the Oceanic Six theme. It's just a brilliant composition. So thanks so much, guys. This podcast really has been a gift.
Hi, Sammy and Rosie. This is Jay from Scotland. Firstly, I just want to say thank you so much for 6 amazing seasons of The Hatch. I've loved every minute. My hot take for the finale is simply that I love the ending. I know there's a lot of controversy over the finale, but for me, the action-packed island narrative, combined with the character-driven Flash Sideways, ends up creating a cinematic masterpiece. I absolutely love how we get to see the Oceanic 815 survivors reunite in the afterlife, along with some other fan favourites like Penny and Juliet. I just struggle to see how it could be beaten in a show that relies so much on character journeys. One interesting observation I had though is that if I'm not mistaken, the only people without a romantic partner present in the church sequence are Boone and Locke. I suppose the question I want to ask you is, do you think Helen should have been there with Locke? It just seemed a little weird to me that she wasn't present given how happy they were together, not only earlier in the season in the episode The Substitute, but previously on the show. Anyway, thanks guys, and I'm going to miss listening to you both.
Audrey, Owen, Sean, Jay, thank you all so much for calling. Sean, I completely agree that Michael Giacchino really made the show what it was. I found myself so many times this week just feeling like a well of emotion and realizing that I was essentially feeling what the score was telling me to feel, and it's super effective, and I'm really grateful for it.
I agree. I checked my notes and I had like 5 different times where I called out the Giacchino score. Interestingly, one where I thought, the lack of Giacchino I thought was interesting. The scene with Jack and Christian in the church, which obviously we'll talk about at great length, but like the first maybe minute or 2 of that scene, it was total silence, no music. And I did think that was and then it slowly picked up as you sort of realized what was going on. But I thought that was an interesting and probably appropriate choice for that, crucial moment of, reveal and sort of personal emotional climax for Jack.
Yeah.
But no, that's a good take. And I just want to briefly say as well with Jay from Scotland, should Helen have been there in the end at the church? I know that gets debated here and there, and I don't have strong feelings one way or another. I think I would have put her in if it was up to me. What about you?
I can't remember which of our brilliant interview guests suggested this, but someone suggested along the way that this is Jack's church and Jack's opportunity to move on, and so what matters is that the people who Jack needs to be there are there. And I like to take that to mean that, like, everyone else sort of passed through their own church when the time came for them to die and move on. And, maybe Jack never knew Helen, and she wasn't a part of his story.
He never would have met her, I don't think. That's interesting.
Yeah.
No, that's a very good call. I like that. I think Damon may have said that to us. Was it Damon? I think it was Damon.
Sounds very possible.
Speaking of Shannon and her being in the church, you had a thought about that you wanted to share, didn't you?
I do, and I am going to eat crow for yet another time in season 6. I have spent 6 years saying unbelievable that Nadia wasn't with Saeed in the church at the end, but watching this, I found myself thinking, what matters here is not who was ultimately the most important person in your life. It's what matters is who is capable of waking each other up, right? I know Sayid and Shannon were obviously together really, really briefly, but Sayid's time with Shannon and vice versa, when they were on this island, these were two characters who were very much subject to bonds and expectations and social roles and career roles and things like that. And when they were on the island, they were suddenly free of a lot of those things and maybe able to have like a new type of truer relationship that they had never been able to have before. And I know Sayid goes on to pursue a relationship with Nadia when he does get off the island, and I'm sure I hope that was as fulfilling as it is possible for a relationship to be, but that doesn't mean that his time with Shannon didn't change him in a way. And we actually got a hot take from a listener, from Ian, who felt similarly, which I felt like validated this idea, so I want to play that really quick.
Hey, Sammy, Rosie, this is Ian from North Reading with a hot take about the finale. My hot take is that I think the show nails it with Sayid and Shannon waking each other up in the Flash sideways. I think to kind of understand how that works, you kind of have to understand the way that Sayid's relationships with Shannon and Nadia kind of intersect with each other. They're not at odds. I think if like Flight 815 had not crashed and Sayid had landed in Los Angeles, I don't think him and Nadia would have had a good relationship. At that moment, Sayid was just too broken and too flawed. And I think that it's actually his love of Shannon that actually kind of opens him up and heals him and makes it so that he does have this like fulfilling relationship with Nadia later. So I think, I think it makes a lot of sense that Nadia isn't the person he ends up with in the Flash Sideways, because I think the Flash Sideways is about like, I think when you awaken, it's with somebody who kind of helps heal you or helps you find yourself, or you just have this connection with, and it's not necessarily your soulmate or anything like that, but I think that's the purpose that Shannon served for Sayid. So I think it makes a lot of sense that they ended up together. Thanks for the great show. Bye.
Yeah, no, I agree with both of you here. I wasn't thinking about this quite so much as you were during the finale, but when you say it this way, it makes sense, and it actually brings to mind for me what Christian says to Jack at the end, which is part of what he says to Jack is the most important part of your life was the time that you spent with these people, which I think speaks very nicely to the point that you're making. Even if Nadia was his true love, or was maybe closer to being his true love than Shannon was, the part of Sayid's life that really, helped him become who he needed to be was the part of his life that Shannon was there for.
Yeah. Yeah, and a number of characters. I mean, Sawyer and Juliet are together despite Sawyer having left the island, and hopefully, I want this for Sawyer, gone on to have lived a meaningful life after the fact, right? And same with Kate, and same with Claire.
Right. Well, it's like Owen said in his hot take a minute ago that, when Evangeline Lilly, when Kate says to Jack, "I missed you so much," it just sort of speaks to the likelihood that she lived a long and hopefully fulfilling life without him. Had lots of time to miss him, but that doesn't mean she couldn't go on and hopefully live a happy life afterwards. You're looking a little verklempt here already, Rosie.
I'm gonna get a little emotional during this episode, I think, but cut me off, please, and share your hot take.
Well, first I need to tell everyone that a few days ago you texted me while you were watching the episode and you said, "I'm watching the finale and I've already cried twice." I don't know how early in the episode that was that you sent that text, but I imagine
I also don't recall.
Yeah. It's a beautiful, so many of my notes for the finale, I wrote 12 pages of notes, but so many of them are just like capital letters, like, I love this so much because of XYZ. Every scene is just like an experience. Except for the parts with Claire, which are kind of sucky. Every other part is wonderful.
What is a Sammy hot take, if not a minor complaint?
I didn't even know I was going to go here or not, but come on. The only bad parts of this episode are the parts where everyone's trying to convince Claire to, come with us or don't point the gun at us. And it's like there's no real inner story or drama that we can get any sense of here. It's just like Claire, seeming kind of whiny and like, no, it's too late for me. Oh, well, I guess if you say it that way, fine, I'll give it a shot. It's like, I don't know, it's like the most reductive and least interesting version of how they could have handled this with Claire that I think is possible.
I thought there there was a little bit more there when Kate is trying to convince her to come back, and Claire says, you know, she recognizes herself in the place that she's in, and she says,
"Oh, come on, please. I can't. Why? Look at me. This island's made me crazy. I don't want Aaron to see me like this. I don't even know how to be a mother anymore. I mean, none of us do. Not at first. But you're not alone. Let me help you."
I thought that was really nice, actually.
I thought that was a lovely moment for Kate, but not for Claire. I just feel like we've gotten no real serious development of interest for Claire, and she's kind of just like a walking caricature at this point on the island. Yeah, for Kate that was lovely. I'll give you that. No, but besides that, this finale, the big picture hot take that I think I have about it, and I'm really curious what you make of this. I've said similar stuff to this throughout the season, I think, but I think that the Flash Sideways storyline, all season, but especially in this episode, and especially the characters reconnecting this scene, they're so much more emotionally impactful. They hit so much harder knowing what's really going on. Knowing that this is the afterlife and that, you know, these are people who are finding each other, you know, in death as they prepare to move on together, and remembering everything that came before in their lives and the bond that they shared. It's just so powerful. Not that it, you know, it wouldn't have been, I'm sure I was, you know, intrigued by it, or at least, you know, like a little bit moved by it the first time I saw it. But the first time you watch this, you know, you don't know this is the afterlife. You're still questioning, is this an alternative reality that was created when Juliet exploded Jughead? Like, is this just another part of the multiverse or something, and these realities are blending together? Like, they were underlaid by this layer of mystery and confusion about what the real significance of this space was. And so I think that, you know, just, I mean, my God, the Sawyer-Juliet scene, or the Claire and Charlie scene, or the Jin and Sun scene, just knowing that where these take place in the timeline, that this is after these characters have lived their whole lives and they're sort of reconnecting for the final time. It's sort of beautiful beyond words, and it's just, I think it just adds so much to the finale on rewatch where you wouldn't have gotten that the first time. I mean, just to give an example here, I mean, like the Juliet and Sawyer reunion scene, which I think we could probably all agree is one of the most beautiful scenes in the whole show, not just this episode.
Yeah.
But like, you know, the line where Juliet says, "We can go Dutch," you know, referring to, you know, sharing something from, you know, from the vending machine. I mean, that's a line that she referenced. She says, I don't remember this, at the beginning of this season when she's dying in the hole after they dig her body out. And they clearly planned that out in advance from the premiere here. So just like to understand watching this in retrospect that, you know, in her dying moments on the island, that sort of the afterlife was sort of filtering into her head at that point, and that's where it's coming from. Or like the Jack Kate scene, for instance, they don't have their, you know, they don't jog each other's memories in the same way as some of the other couples, which we should talk about. But when Kate says to Jack, "That's not how you know me," and she said, "I've missed you so much," as our listener talked about. I mean, that stuff just has so much more power with the understanding that this is the afterlife and they've already lived their whole lives. "I've missed you so much. We can go Dutch." I mean, stuff like that. The Jin Sun reunion coming after the events of Across the Sea, and knowing this is the first time that they've seen each other since they died together, and knowing that it's, again, one of the last moments they're going to get together. That stuff just hits so much harder, I think, understanding the context surrounding it.
Do you remember how you felt watching this live and not knowing that? Because I didn't watch this until years after it had aired, and I knew, you know, I sort of knew what was up.
I think watching it live, I was just still trying really hard to figure out what was going on.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, it's like this storyline gets introduced at the end of season 5 and beginning of season 6 in the aftermath of Juliet exploding Jughead. So at this point, you're still asking yourself, like, what is this reality? Is it an alternate timeline? Is it a different universe out there? Like, I just remember spending so much of the finale trying to figure out, like, what the deal was still. And it's a bold choice that they make, waiting until those very, very last minutes to reveal what's been going on this whole season. And I'm not saying that was a bad choice. It would have been interesting to see if they had revealed that, you know, in the episode before the finale, for instance. But I definitely think that the result of it is that the finale just is much more powerful on second, third, fourth watch, etc.
That makes a lot of sense. And I also think a lot of the events of the Flash Sideways leading up to the finale are pretty confusing. Like, there are definitely some moments of emotional resonance, right? We talked about Ben and John in the last episode. We talked about Dr. Linus. But a lot of it is also just like, what in the world is going on here? Particularly, with Desmond's antics, like hitting people with his car.
Right.
And
or Hurley in this episode shooting Charlie with a dart, which is hilarious, but what the fuck?
But also, it's really sort of outside the bounds of even the ridiculous stuff that's happened on the island so far, right? I mean, it's just like, I totally see how you could come to the finale and be in a place of what in the world is going on.
Just seeing the growth that they're experiencing and being able to understand that, how that relates, I guess, to, the main timeline, or understand that, that this is the afterlife, that they're there to remember and to let go. Having that all in mind, to remember and to let go, I just think it adds a layer of meaning, so that rather than watching all this wondering, what's going on? Mm-hmm. What's going on? What's going on? It's like, it sort of hits emotional note after emotional note in a more resonant way, having seen the ending. I'm not sure if they intended that, but I think that's how it worked out.
Well, and it's impossible to know, right? I mean, to be in the writer's room in this case would be to know how it ends. And so they're writing the whole thing knowing how it already ends. There's no way to really replicate the experience of viewing it for the first time until you view it for the first time.
Yeah.
My proposal for how to work our way through everything we've got to get through would be to start on the island and then to end at the end.
I'm with you.
Okay.
I'm with you. That's a good strategy.
Yeah, the first half of the episode hits a lot of, interestingly, like, there's obviously a lot of drama and scary shit happening, but there are also a lot of great emotional notes. There's one where Sawyer and Kate kind of joke with each other just like old times, and Sawyer says, I'll have to tell you not to come with me. There's Rose and Bernard and Vincent are still there, living their best life. Bernard's got a huge beard. They're just trying to avoid I think Rose called it the drama.
I especially loved in that sequence Rose. I mean, when Locke shows up and it gets scary for a minute and you think, Rose and Bernard are in danger. I loved so much Rose saying to Desmond, you don't have to tell him anything, don't, and meanwhile their lives are at stake and this beautiful existence, and, Rose doesn't want Desmond to do anything that he feels is, wrong or dangerous to someone else, so, she's willing to give that up for Desmond.
Yeah. And I think
it's really pretty.
I think we talked about this last time we had a surprise visit from Rose and Bernard, but they have been at peace for so long, like they so long ago accepted, I think because of Rose's cancer, they so long ago accepted that death is inevitable and we've got to sort of make the most of the time that we have, that I think they've been able to appear as kind of sages in situations like that where they can just say, like, we're not going to sort of fight for our lives the way that everyone else is fighting for their lives.
It's kind of interesting in retrospect that it was Rose who, of course, had the terminal cancer diagnosis, that she ends up getting to live this sort of long, peaceful, beautiful life in a way that so many characters who struggled with the idea of death do not, when she was so comfortable with it and ready for it.
Yeah.
There was, speaking of death and comfort with death and life, I'm so glad even though it was really quick, that they throw the Richard moment with the gray hair.
Yeah.
Looks like you got your first gray hair. What are you smiling about? I think I just realized I want to live. It's good timing.
It's quick. I almost wish we'd gotten more, but it's such a perfect follow-up to Ab Aeterno, and Nectar with that little, just the one line there really brings that back to mind and brings it out. It's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what the future holds for Richard and Miles and Frank is that they all do a sitcom together. That was one of the true joys of this On Island story, is watching those three, like, totally random characters who you never would have, like, picked together. Just the fact that they got thrown together and we get to see them, like, the writing, the humor, Frank just being, like, a total caricature of himself in the best possible way. Miles, literally fixing up an airplane based on, was it a couple of summers working in construction.
With duct
Richard,
tape.
with duct tape and all-knowing Richard, reduced to sort of errand boy. I mean, it's fucking hilarious. I love that story so much. I want to see those two guys together forever.
We actually got a hot take about those scenes as well.
Hi, Sammy and Rosie. This is a hot take for the finale. And I just wanted to highlight a scene that involves characters we really didn't meet until later in seasons in Lost, but was one of my favorites in this finale. And that's with Frank and Richard and Miles all around the plane. And I mean, there's great lines like Frank saying, reminding them, you forgot I am a pilot. But just, it really made me reflect on how, as much as people think Lost goes downhill in later seasons, we do get characters that really, when you think about it, the show would be lost without. So that's my little, hot take for this episode.
Yeah, this is a great call out, I think. I mean, I know we talked a lot about the science team that comes to the island in season 4 and how we would have liked a little more from Charlotte's storyline, and those characters really, really brought a lot to the story, and I came to love each of them individually.
No, agreed. Although, who says Lost went downhill the last few years? I haven't talked to those people. 4 and 5 are some of the best parts. No, that's a great story. There's so much good stuff on the island, so much great dialogue, so much great music. Should we talk about Jack, since he's kind of at the center of this? Should we just go straight into Jack?
I think that's a good idea. To start this, we got so many hot takes this week. I tell you what, we received this one that's actually referring back to early season 6, specifically to the lighthouse, but I think listening to this will help us think about how far Jack has come, which I think is what a lot of this episode is about.
Hey guys, just wanted to give a hot take on season 6 overall and kind of go back to the lighthouse with regard to Rosie's take on the candidate episode and her frustration with Jack and his old fix-it ways. What I saw in Lighthouse was the manipulation of Jacob, of Jack in the episode, and how he's been watching him his whole life, and what a trigger You Have What It Takes would be for Jack when Hurley relays that message, and will make him want to confront Jacob as to what he means and ask him why he would say that. Jack ultimately realizes that he's been duped by Jacob, and that statement was made because he discovers that Jacob has been watching him this whole time. He regresses to the broken version of himself that feels lost and out of control and destroys the mirrors in a fit of rage. For anyone who suffers from a feeling of never being enough or not having what it takes, the natural response is to try and control everything around you so that you never feel that empty, soul-sucking feeling of failure. Because when you inevitably fail, it just reaffirms your belief that you don't have what it takes. Jack's arc and his redemption always resonated with me, as I have the very same issues that he has, and it's why he's my favorite character on the show. And I understand why he's not for most. He's unafraid and always afraid simultaneously, and this leads to impulsive and reckless behavior, all in the quest to prove his worth. Jacob knows this, and he knows that Jack's redemption lies in the quiet and in the letting go, and is trying to guide Jack in that direction. This wound all starts when young Jack is told by Christian that he's not good at letting go and doesn't have what it takes, which is a running theme throughout his life. Jack only finds his worth in what he can do or fix for others.
I thought this was really thoughtful, and not going to lie, this kind of spoke to me a little bit. The idea that, the way our listener phrased it, was unafraid and always afraid simultaneously. And that really feels true to me. Like Jack was unafraid of the moment-to-moment stuff. And that's what made him a natural leader, I think. I mean, he was afraid of the others or afraid of, whoever we were battling in the moment, but not in a way that would paralyze him and keep him from acting, right? But he was afraid in this huge way of failing. And that ultimately is what kept him from, I think, what we have described as greatness or real leadership or the qualities that start to come out in season 6. It seems like he maybe gets... Do you think he gets less afraid of that stuff after? You could argue that the end of season 5 is a great failure, right? And does that make him less afraid of failing, or does he just, I don't know.
Well, it's really interesting. Whether it makes him less afraid of failing, I don't know. I definitely thought, it was interesting. We talked about this last episode, and I think he says something again this episode, sort of acknowledging, that he's fallible, that he makes mistakes, and sort of being at ease with the idea that he's fallible. Not that maybe he doesn't like it, but the conversation with Sawyer he had last episode, and again some comments this week where he just where he's talking to, I think he's talking to Desmond, right, when they're down in the well.
You were right, Doc. There's a first time for everything. How to put it back? It was like a train. That's what you did. You took that stone out of that hole over there. Jack, you can't. Even if you put it back on, it'll kill you. It has to be me. Desmond, you've done enough. You want to do something, go home and be with your wife and son. What about you, Jack? I'll see you in another life, brother.
Like, he definitely has more of a humility and sort of a, an understanding that he's fallible and a comfort with it that I think he didn't have before. So I think you're right on that front.
Yeah.
I was going to say that it's sort of a related thought that we can try to gauge here whether this is the same or just a related phenomenon. I think that so much of what we see from him this week and what we see from him, transformed from the man of science and the man of science, man of faith debate is that he seems just so much more comfortable with uncertainty now than he did before, with the knowledge that things might not work out the way he wants them to, or he's not sure how he's going to get them to work out the way he wants them to, but that's okay. I mean, right from the beginning, Sawyer asks him after he has his meeting with Jacob. Well, Sawyer says, "I'm kind of wondering what the hell just happened." And Jack's response is, "That makes two of us." So, he's taken on this role despite not knowing or not having a great comfort level or understanding of what it consists of or, what specifically he's going to do with it, which is interesting. A little while later as well, we get the, speech that Jack makes where he, says to the man in black, "I'm going to, what happens next? I'm going to kill you. How are you going to do that?" That's the surprise. Well, the surprise is Jack doesn't know yet. Mm-hmm. As he says to, I think, Sawyer and Kate, like, he's sure that Desmond, is brought there for a reason. He thinks that he's a weapon. He thinks it's going to allow him to kill the man in black. He doesn't know how. Mm-hmm. And yet he's comfortable moving forward with this and basing his plans around it despite the uncertainty.
Yeah.
So I think there's, I think there's a strong element here of, everything had to be perfect and scientific and, there had to be a reason or an easy explanation for everything. And, he's okay with the fact now that that's not the case. Maybe he's not the man of faith in quite the same way that Locke was. But, we see it in the Flash Sideways too, where he's learning this lesson one more time. He's, sorry to get into the Flash Sideways and we're talking about the on-island stuff, but where he's so resistant. Like everyone else, once they get that first flash, it's like it overwhelms them. They let the emotions come. They let the memories come. Jack pushes back. He keeps, he starts to see stuff. He pushes back. He pushes back. He doesn't want to accept it with Locke. He doesn't want to accept it with Kate. That's that instinct still of like, if this can't be, explained scientifically, I can't accept it. He has to relearn that lesson one more time before he can move on. But I think that's similar to what we're seeing here that he's learned on the island, which is just because it doesn't have an easy explanation or he doesn't know what the explanation is yet, that's okay. He can live with that. He can make plans based off of that. He can, make life decisions based off of that.
Yeah, I think fundamentally these are the same thing. Jack's fear of failure and his desire to know and understand everything so that he can respond to it. I mean, that's just perfectionism. And I'm a perfectionist. My brain works this way. I have increasingly come to identify with Jack, which is funny when I think back to season one. Mea culpa again. But the idea that I cannot act. I don't know that his problem is exactly that he doesn't believe that he's capable. Like, I think he has, despite all of the internalized messaging of you don't have what it takes, I think he has proven to himself in many areas, right, that he does have what it takes. But it's so easy to shake that understanding. Like, one failure can sort of shake that to its core, rather than like sort of a healthy relationship to failure is, I made a mistake and I will learn from it and I will move on. And so
which is what he's now been able to do going through the Juliet experience, going through the Lighthouse experience.
Yeah, like his instinct is to run from failure and to not enter into situations where he thinks failure is a real risk. And he's had no other choice here, I think, because the stakes have been so high and the situations have been so, maybe we say, unusual. He's been forced to adapt. Like, he has no other choice but to recognize that he might fail sometimes, or just not take any action whatsoever, which is, I think, even more uncharacteristic than the possibility of taking action and failing.
I'm with you. At this point, watching this ending and understanding, I think having developed this much stronger understanding of what Jack has actually been going through and how he's gotten through it, I like and sympathize with the character more than I once did. I really do. I also felt like, and this, maybe not quite as strongly, but when he and Kate say their goodbye at the end, the scene where they kiss goodbye on the cliff, frankly, it felt to me like the first time that their love felt more sort of real and not just like a plot contrivance. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know exactly what it was about it. It just felt a lot more earned than it ever had before.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a way in which that's related to what we've been talking about here, is that Jack wasn't forcing it. He wasn't coming to the relationship with Kate from a perspective of, I need to be a certain way to be a husband or a partner or a father. He was just beyond that. He had let go, and that made him better able to, I'm sure, had he lived, he would have probably been a much better partner than he ever could have been before.
I'd like to think so, and I'm sympathetic with Kate, I've got to say. I mean, she sort of begs him at the end, you can come with us, you don't have to do this. He says, no, I have to do this. And earlier in the episode, there's sort of another version of that scene after Jack comes back from his meeting with Jacob, where Kate asks him,
why did you take the job, Jack?
I was supposed to.
Why? Because some stranger wrote our names on a wall?
I took it because the island's all I've got left. It's the only thing in my life I haven't managed to ruin.
You haven't ruined anything. Nothing is irreversible.
This would be so sweet if you weren't all about to die.
I do have to say, I'm sympathetic to Kate here.
Yeah.
Because, she's right. Jack is making a choice. He believes he was supposed to, but he doesn't have to do. He says it's all I've got left. It's like, no, you've got her left, and you could go live a long life with her. That's what she wants here.
Right.
I don't know, actually. You say you think Jack would have been a better, better husband, better father, better partner of some kind if, with everything he had learned. But I don't know, in some ways it still feels like maybe he's afraid of that. Maybe he still doesn't think he can live up to that based on, who he is. But it could be as simple as he really feels so strongly that he has to do this that he can't consider that possibility. But it does seem like he doesn't really want to look that possibility in the face too hard of going and living a life and forgetting about the island.
There are ways in which that's a really, really scary choice, and maybe scarier than any of this, right? I mean, having to show up every day and be a good and ethical and upstanding person and face failure every day and make mistakes every day. I mean, that's the human condition. That also sucks.
Yeah. And for sure, Jack has learned to deal with it better, but I still get the sense that he's not,
no, that's a good point.
He's got a little ways to go here.
Yeah.
As we see in the Flash Sideways, where he, keeps pushing back and doesn't want to accept what's really happening because it doesn't feel right or possible or doesn't, it's scary. In that scene with his dad at the end, he's almost like a little kid, where are we, Dad? What is this place? What are we doing here? It's, there's definitely I think a core, there's still that core fear and insecurity there that, you're right that we all have to some extent, but it's interesting to see how that still manifests here, even with everything he's gone through and learned.
I think this is something that is thematic in Lost, is that even when we grow, how much do we really change? Like, our instincts are still the same. Our assumptions many of them are still the same. Like, it's hard to sort of override that base layer of, this is sort of who I am and what I'm about and what I tend to do. And maybe that's a bit what's happening here, is that, Jack has made incredible strides and still is Jack.
Yeah, I feel like that's interesting just because that speaks to the Flash Sideways, the whole idea that they still kind of have to relearn the lessons that they learned in life one last time.
Yeah.
I think, no matter how many times you kind of went through with this again and again, like, you're never going to learn them. You're never going to learn them fully. Like,
yeah, I mean, we see that with Sawyer's the first character who comes to mind, right? Who in The Flash Sideways is, you know, living sort of an upstanding life and is still a jerk to this woman he goes on a date with, and still
harboring this stuff that he, you know, doesn't want to let out and doesn't want to, you know, wants to pretend like it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and it's a really big deal for him to sort of let Miles in and accept support. I mean, I think he's another good example of even our higher selves are still ourselves.
Yeah. And I think no matter how high you got, if you had, you know, 6 versions of that in-between space to get ready, like, you know, you'd still need more to clear it out of your system totally. I don't think you'd ever be able to do that.
Yeah.
Ooh, it's beautiful. I was talking about just Kate again briefly. I liked that she was kind of reading the riot act to Jack. I also, again, just like with the scene with Jacob and what they died for, where she kind of called him out right away, like, Kate just continues to take no prisoners. Like, the moment the man in black shows up, she just grabs Sawyer's rifle out of his hand and starts shooting immediately. I mean, not to mention that she actually does get to kill him later with that real badass, you know, I saved a bullet for you line. I especially liked when she started shooting at the man in black. I don't know if you know, so this Ben and Desmond just drop to the ground in the background, which
yes, I did.
Again, hilarious. But even stuff like with Sawyer, she had another good moment where Sawyer's like, I guess we better jump off the cliff. As, you know, as if he, you know, thinks Kate needs to be convinced by it. And Kate's just like, snap like that. She's off, and Sawyer's, you know, watching her looking kind of stunned. Like, did she really just do that? Like, okay, I guess I got to do it now. Like, I don't know. Kate to me is like maybe the star of this finale outside of Jack.
You're right that she is the person who ultimately kills the villain.
It makes me think about how in the original plan for the pilot, as we've discussed, was to, you know, have Jack, played by Michael Keaton in the original thinking, get killed at the end of the pilot and have Kate go on to be the leader. And yeah, an episode like this makes me feel like, yeah, she might have taken a bit longer to find her footing than Jack would have, but she would have gotten there, and Evangeline Lilly would have gotten there as an actor. I just, you know, she does some of her absolute strongest work, as we've, you know, sort of alluded to this week, I think.
Yeah.
Would have been interesting. That's, yeah.
I think Kate has, just like Jack and Sawyer, has grown a lot, but her instincts are still there, and her instincts are such that when it is time to act, she acts, and can usually do it in a way that's pretty savvy and pretty effective. She thinks creatively. She is not afraid in the face of danger. And those are all skills that she came to the island with and are put to really good use here, despite the fact that she's no longer, you know, on the run from the law.
You know, one other Kate moment that might take us into a different character. There was a beautiful, very quick moment talking about her, her fast instincts and just responding to crisis. When the tree falls on Ben.
Oh, yeah.
She's the one who immediately shouts to Ben, we're going to get you out of here, all right? Like, she's not scared. She's in charge. She knows they can figure it out. I love that. It's also, I think it says how far Ben has come, that even Kate, who, you know, he had famously kidnapped and stuck in a cage, her immediate instinct is, okay, you know, our own lives are at risk here, but how do we stop and make sure we save Ben? It says a lot about both of them.
Yeah, she comes across, I think, as quite selfless between that and her insistence still on getting Claire off the island, which I know, I understand your position on Claire, but
I'm not complaining that Kate wants to get her off the island. It's noble of Kate and the right, and that's what brought her back here, and she still fulfills that mission, which is wonderful.
Yeah, and I think is quite generous about it and is able to. I think it's largely her like force of will that gets Claire to come with them, right? I mean, she just insists and insists and insists until Claire finally gives in. It comes across as, like you said, Claire sort of not having a lot of agency. And
thank you for saying that better than I did.
Yeah. Sure.
Claire not having a lot of agency. She seems like she's just been sort of an easily manipulated, shallow pawn of stronger ruled characters going back the last 2 seasons.
Well, and I think that is largely true, but fortunately, Kate genuinely has her best interest at heart.
Thank goodness.
So yeah, before we move on too quickly from Kate killing the man in black, we've heard a lot of stories about that fight sequence on the cliff, from people who were there, from Terry O'Quinn who helped film it. But I was really struck when we see the first shot of the cliff from the side. That thing is steep.
Yeah, I can see why Bender was telling us that he was nervous about filming there.
Yeah.
Because Yeah, I mean, it's like, God, thank God nothing went wrong.
Seriously.
No, it's what they accomplished there technically from the filming and the editing and the music. It's the only part that annoyed me, frankly, was the cut to commercial when Jack is flying through the air coming down at Locke. I thought that was annoying as fuck. But other than that, it's a perfect sequence. And it was amazing to me too. And one thing I really liked when Locke dies, I looked at the clock. There were 47 minutes left on the episode when Locke fell off the cliff and died, or was kicked off the cliff and died. And I just thought that spoke so nicely to this being larger than a show about good versus evil. Mm-hmm. That, the bad guy is dead wasn't the climax, wasn't the emotional resonance. Like, that stuff was still to come. It needed to happen.
Yes.
But the last 45 minutes of the show did not need to be about good defeating evil. Like, they got that taken care of with plenty of time left for the stuff that really mattered, which I really liked.
I think that's a good point. There just wasn't a lot of suspense there for me. No part of me, I think the first time I watched this, ever suspected that the Man in Black was going to win, right? That just wouldn't have made a lot of sense, I think, in the sort of emotional thrust of the show. I think they did a really nice job with it, and then we got to move on to, honestly, a lot of other emotional stuff on the island, too. The stuff about Hurley taking over as the leader and who decides to stay and who decides to go and all that.
Yeah, Hurley taking over. It's really interesting to think about how good and evil are going to, continue to play out here post Jack and John, post Man in Black and Jacob. It's interesting how this sort of does and doesn't set that up.
Yeah, it's actually, I think this is a really beautiful scene for Jack, too. After the Man in Black is dead, Kate encourages Jack to let the island sink. And she essentially says, let's all go. Fuck this place. Jack refuses, but he tries to get everybody else to go, and then Ben, of course, declines, and then Hurley just looks at Jack and he says, I'm with you, dude. And Jack just smiles, and I thought that was really genuine and sweet.
Yeah, okay. Well, let me complain a little here, and talk about Hurley. Hurley says, I guess this is the second part I was a little annoyed with. Hurley says, I'm with you, dude, right after Jack says to him, Hugo, you better get going. And Hurley's full line is, uh-oh, no way. You think I'm going down that? I'm with you, dude. That being the rope ladder down the cliff. So it's like we can have a whole conversation about whether Hurley makes sense as the leader of the island, but I've always kind of had this lingering annoyance that the reason it really ends up working out that way is not because of a choice that Hurley makes, or not because of some grander machination within these characters, but because he's a big dude and can't go down the rope ladder.
That's a really good point.
That frustrates me.
That's a really good point. Oh, that disappoints me.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Sorry.
You're right. The full context matters.
I don't know. So like I said, we can have a whole nother discussion here about, Hurley as the leader and why that does or doesn't make sense. I think I wish they had gotten us there a different way.
Well, let's get into Hurley as the leader. We got a few hot takes about this as well, so I want to start with this one.
Hi, this is Rustine from LA, and my hot take is about the show's decision to pick Hurley as the final protector of the island. When I first saw the finale, I thought it was a really cute piece of fan service to pick the show's most lovable character to become the leader of the island, but rewatching it now, I realized that he was really the only choice they ever had. Because as far back as we can see, the vibes on the island are totally fucked. Whether it was back in Jacob's childhood all the way to the present day, no one's really having a good time on the island. And you know who's the only one to even try and bring the good vibes? It's Hurley. He builds the golf course, sets up the boys' trip to fix the van, and in general does everything he can to bring some good vibes to the island. And he succeeds at this vibe shift far more often than Jack or Locke or Jacob ever do. So let's give 3 cheers for Hurley, our king of the vibes.
So this is interesting. I love the way that you phrased this. We needed to reset the vibes on the island.
King of the vibes.
But I like the point about Hurley was one of the characters early on who was able to sort of appreciate the island for what it was and do things like create the golf course and say, darn it, we're going to have fun today. And it doesn't all have to be so incredibly serious all of the time. And maybe there's something to that.
Maybe. I mean, I certainly enjoyed the point of was it that the caller said no one's having a really good time on the island. Like,
well, and if the purpose of the island is to continue to exist, then like the low conflict approach makes a lot of sense. And maybe it works.
Don't create the next Man in Black by making it such a horrible place that if you get stuck there, you want to,
you're willing
to
kill
destroy
everybody. The entire world to get out.
Just to get out. I mean, I know this is a little bit of a, a silly, not silly take, it's just a little bit of a light version of this. Yeah, Hurley's protector, it's like, I guess I'm not offended by it. Like, he likes to do, he likes to take care of people, as Ben says. He, likes to do well by people. Do I think they could have made a stronger argument for Ben as the protector, as his, full redemption arc? Like, maybe. Do I think they could have made a case for various other characters? Maybe. But, Hurley's fine. I just, I guess I don't feel strongly one way or another.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Ben, we've got two pretty similar but slightly different flavor hot takes from Emma and Connor about what Ben's role might be.
Hi, this is Emma from Texas. So I started Lost for the first time last September, and I'm now nearing the end of my second watch through. I've become a big fan of the show, and I'm really enjoying the podcast as well. Admittedly, there's a chunk of it I haven't listened to yet. I'm halfway through season 2, but I wanted to go ahead and get my hot take in while I still have the chance. I did listen to the last episode on what they died for, and it got me thinking about a couple things. If you guys have discussed any of this or other callers have brought all this up, I apologize. But the first thing I was thinking about is on the topic of Hurley representing the light as protector of the island, that whole idea of yin and yang being at play here. And I'm wondering if this is why Ben becomes the second in command. Of course, we've seen how much darkness resides inside of Ben, so it could be he's now fulfilling that role that the Man in Black did before. Except now, the light and darkness aren't competing like the brothers were. They're working together. This could be the reunification of the light and dark, or at least the next best thing.
Hi, Sammy and Rosie. This is Connor. I just listened to your most recent episode, What They Died For, and wanted to leave some feedback. You were talking about how the mother had some light and dark within her, and then obviously Jacob and the Man in Black were light and dark, and how sort of those conflicts led to their failures as leaders of the island, and how then Hurley's taking over as sort of a pure light figure. But I think it's important to remember that also Ben serves with him, and Ben, I think, is pretty inarguably a dark character. Despite any small bits of redemption, he's still pretty evil. I mean, in the second to last episode, he kills Widmore in cold blood. Not to mention that Ben's darkness sort of manifested from the well in the temple, or the pool in the temple, which we can maybe assume is from that same source of the island that turned the Man in Black evil. So I think it's probably a similar type of darkness within him. But I think that Hurley, who is more accepting and welcoming to Ben, is able to more effectively, work with him and lead the island in a positive manner rather than trying to fight with the darkness.
Yeah, I like thinking about Hurley as the protector much more in this context, with this idea that Ben sort of is the dark to balance Hurley's light, and that those things are being unified in a way that they weren't, when with the Man in Black and Jacob. And we talked about this with Across the Sea, right? The idea that the mother perhaps contained both of those forces within her, and then with Jacob and the Man in Black, they got split, and now they're sort of coming together again. I kind of like that. It makes me appreciate it a bit more.
Yeah, it helps me understand them as a team. I mean, those are two characters that we don't really see one-on-one much at all. And it's interesting to think about the two of them operating together. But if they are more of what I think potentially Jacob and the Man in Black were supposed to be, right? They were not supposed to be mortal enemies. I mean,
well, maybe the mother should have raised them that way rather than raising them thinking,
right.
Man in Black, you're the guy who's going to lead the island. Jacob, you're the other dude. Maybe it would have worked out better.
Yeah, probably.
Frankly, it makes me want to see more than ever the story of what happens with Hurley and Ben and how they would bring those sort of differing forces to bear here. It'd be really cool to see play out.
I don't super understand what the day-to-day work of maintaining the island is. Going forward, like, are they going to have to find new candidates? We don't need to argue about what that work might entail, but yeah, I think I'm kind of on the side of it would be good for the island to be at peace for a while.
Yeah. Maybe the island would be better if no one had ever found it. Maybe humans shouldn't be meddling with this stuff.
Probably shouldn't be quite so easy for humans to meddle with this stuff.
Yeah.
If all you have to do is descend into a cave and, like, heave this boulder out of the ground, then the whole world implodes.
My gosh, that was
not important.
We talked with Bender about that stat. It is what it is. You'll hear a bit more from that about that in our conversation with Jack Bender this week.
I mean, we should say before we leave this, Ben and Hurley, at the end of the on-island story, seem to agree that there could be a better way to run the island, that they want it to be different. I mean, how could you not? But they both seem committed to building something brand new, which makes sense because there's not a ton of precedent for how to run the island.
So we've been mostly talking about stuff that happened on the island, but I mean, the real emotional core of this episode and of this show is taking place in the afterlife. So should we talk about the sideways?
Yeah.
I'm just going through my notes here, and right at the top, I have a note wondering, because we have that joke about Christian Shepherd, where, Christian Shepherd, seriously? Kate asks Desmond, and it does make me think, like, gee, when the writers named that character, they must have had some sense way back at the beginning about the sort of spiritually significant role he would ultimately play, right? Like, it didn't just happen that way.
I've got to imagine somebody would have read the script and said exactly what Kate says here. And just said, like, are you going to do something with that? Because if you're not, it's, it feels a little heavy-handed. Does it feel a little heavy-handed anyway? Sure. But,
I mean, there's a lot of this stuff that's frankly very heavy-handed, but it's like, it's still great.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like, I had a note, where'd my note go? I had a note somewhere in here, like the scene with, Ben and Hurley outside the church. You were a real good number 2, and you were a great number 1, Hugo. And my note is, this episode lays it on thick in the best of ways. It's like this is a reward episode. So anyways, no, I don't mind that it's heavy-handed with Christian Shepherd, but it is pretty funny that we finally get like a scene that comments on it. Talking about the remembering scenes, which are the real core, I love that Jin and Sun get the first one. I mean, the first one in this episode. I mean, after Hurley and Libby back when, but like after what went down a couple of weeks ago, just that we get that, right off the bat, them remembering their lives together and getting to be together again. I was very satisfied by that. I'm glad that they did not make us wait for that. That just felt like a good place to start that sequence of events.
Yeah. And to your point last week about how quickly the show moves on from Ji-yeon, Ji-yeon is present here. She is only present as, a fetus, a child who has not been born. Did that assuage your feelings at all?
No, I still kind of felt like, I mean, she's like you said, she's unborn, she's a fetus, she's talked about, but she's not the purpose of this scene. Like, it's beautiful that it's the act of the ultrasound with Juliet that jogs their memories, but ultimately it's Ji-yeon, once again, I would say, as a tool, as a means to an end that has to do with Jin and Sun not having to do with their daughter. So, no, I was not super satisfied by that. And in fact, we got a hot take from a listener, Marky, who's also pretty unsatisfied by that, so I think we should play that one.
Hey, Sammy and Rosie. This is Marky from Texas. My hot take is going to be in regards to the candidate. I completely disagree with Jin staying down there to die with Sun. I understand it was a very emotional moment. It looked great visually, all of that. But thinking about the fact that he is like willingly choosing to orphan his daughter, I cannot get on board with that. It makes me sick to think about. But then it also made me think about the end of season 4 when he's down in the bottom of the freighter with everyone who's trying to defuse that bomb. Like, man, they've got it under control. You're really not contributing anything. You need to be up there handling your business with your pregnant wife. So, I don't know. It just made me think maybe there's some part of him that doesn't want to be a father. Maybe that's the underlying, driving cause for him to be doing these things. I don't know. But anyways, I'm going to miss you guys a lot. This has been my safe space for years, so thanks.
This is a hard one. I'm not a parent. I can't possibly put myself in those shoes. And, you know, at the time that Jin makes the decision to stay in the sub, he has just found out that Ji-yeon even exists. Well, no, because he knew Sun was pregnant, but I guess he just...
I think it has a lot less to do with him being afraid of being a father than just that Ji-yeon seems a lot less real to him than Sun does, which is understandable, actually.
Yeah.
It's like, so I don't know, I don't know that I take quite as much umbrage with the decision, thinking about it in that context, but it definitely is sad.
I think it's important to realize that, like, there is collateral damage to this stuff. Like, there are people back in the real world who are going to suffer because, you know, Hurley's parents are never going to know what happened to him. Yeah, despite the fact that we haven't been in the real world in a long time on this show, the real world is still out there. And the choices that we're making on the island do affect that.
I would like to say, maybe Hurley can tell his parents what he's up to, because we see him leaving the island in the epilogue and the new man in charge, so maybe he'll do things differently than Jacob in that respect. By the way, the new man in charge, stay tuned for details. We haven't figured out quite what we're doing yet, so I'll just note this here. We are going to do one more episode after this about the new man in charge, and again, working on details, but this won't be the very last time you hear from us, and follow us on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast, Facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast to keep updated on when and where that will be. What do you got note-wise on the sideways?
It's interesting to me that the moment when Kate wakes up is when she's delivering Claire's baby. I think that really underscores how important Erin was to her and how important her identity as a mother was to her. We don't get to know if after Kate leaves the island, you know, she became a mother in a different way, if she remained in Erin's life, you know, what that meant. But clearly that was something that really, really shaped her. I'm glad that the show tied up that knot with Claire on the island for that reason.
That's fair. I don't think they shouldn't have done a story with Claire on the island. I just think they should have led up to it better. What's interesting, though, I agree with you I think it was interesting for both Kate and Jack that unlike the other, you know, sort of couplings, that for them it wasn't the, you know, the love that they shared that was the awakening moment. And I think with Kate, you're right that it speaks to the importance that Erin played in her life, and you know that was really the touchstone for her. For Jack, I think it goes back to the fact that as we've discussed, his father and you know sort of the insecurity that his father sort of imbued him with as a young child. That working through that and working through his relationship with his dad was really sort of the key real thing for him. But I just think overall, it's hard not to look at this and think, well, for these two characters, their romance that they had, their love, their relationship, it was not necessarily the most important or the most meaningful part of either of their lives. Not that it didn't matter,
right,
but that it wasn't like above and beyond the thing that really helped them become who they needed to be. That was happening sort of separate of the bond that they shared.
Yeah, that happens to Locke too, and maybe that's another reason that Helen is not in the church. I appreciated that. I mean, I think it's good to remember that life has many meanings, and there are many identities that we take on that are not romantic partner, that can shape who we are and be incredibly meaningful, and I appreciated that the show did that.
Agreed.
That said, Charlie shows up right after Claire gives birth, and he just sort of comes in and he says, "I brought a blanket." And it's really sweet and endearing. It's also just like so insufficient for what the moment calls for. And it really reminded me of, you know, the peanut butter. A lot of things that Charlie did on the island that I thought were incredibly, like, well-intentioned and kind and generous, but, like, kind of left me with the feeling of, like, oh, buddy, you're not, you know, you're helping in sort of an emotional sense. I don't know that you're helping in a practical one, but it's sweet nonetheless.
It is. That scene made me emotional unexpectedly.
Yeah.
I knew that Juliet and Sawyer would get me. I knew that Jin and Sun would get me. I didn't realize quite how hard it would get me when Charlie starts crying and starts playing with Erin. Like, he kisses Claire, of course, but he immediately starts playing with little baby Erin, and I don't know, and she reverts so quickly from the, you know, sort of goth punk, you know, heavily make-upped, wasted version of himself to the, sort of sweet, silly, happy-go-lucky Charlie that we learned to love on the island. It was very touching to me, and it made me feel a lot more warmth towards Charlie than I might have felt about him previously at other points in the show.
Well, I think that demonstrates Charlie's growth as well, right? Like he always wanted to be that person. He wanted to be a partner to Claire and a father or a kindly figure to Aaron, and he just didn't know how. I mean, he didn't have the tools. He didn't have the knowledge. He had, his own ego got in the way a lot, I think. And maybe this version of Charlie is better equipped to do those things than sort of immature on island Charlie was.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and at the same time, it's sad that he couldn't be that person in life, that it got cut short. I mean, that's true across a lot of these characters. I mean, some of them, like Sawyer, for instance, I think, and Ben to an extent, they get to become in life the people that they always wanted to be but struggled with, at least to a great extent, right? Like the fact that they're able to live out their lives and their existences, they're able to experience that growth. Jack, in some ways. And then with some of them, like Charlie, getting cut short here, or Saeed, for instance, who's in such a dark place when he dies.
Jin and Sun, who don't get to go be parents.
Yeah, no, it's just that some of them need this extra space, I think, more than others. But which is nice that they get it. But it's also like, man, it's too bad they couldn't have lived as that person for a while.
Yeah.
That Jin and Sun couldn't have lived with their daughter. That Charlie couldn't have lived as a loving partner and father figure. That Saeed couldn't have, really lived for more than like a year finding peace.
Yeah.
Some of them are tough. Some of them are really tough. Another character I really sympathize for is Miss Hawking in her interaction with Desmond. I think it was the most sympathy I'd ever felt for her when she asks him, "Are you going to take my son?" Mm-hmm. I mean, she's so vulnerable, and again, she's using this space for something that she never got to do in life, which was to really have a warm and loving relationship, seemingly with her son, because the person she was before she passed away was not capable of allowing for that bond to form because her priorities were so fucked up. So it's like, it's beautiful that she gets to have that here, but it's like, man, she knows this is a liminal space, as you've said. She knows that this is temporary and this is all she's going to get. So it's beautiful, but it's very sad.
Yeah, and Juliet too comes to mind. I mean, she gets to be a mother. Despite, being divorced from Jack, presumably she and Sawyer get to, meet each other. And I guess we don't really know whether the afterlife continues beyond the church. I think it's implied that it doesn't, but, I like to think that it does.
I guess I always felt like whatever comes through those church doors is not conscious in the way that this space is. Like, I know I've brought up his dark materials from time to time. So spoiler alert for those of you who haven't read it or watched the recently concluded TV series, which was nicely done. I always think of it as the moment, like, they have the afterlife where the ghosts are all kind of like gathered, and then when they walk back out into the real world after the window is cut and their bodies, or their ghost bodies, kind of dissolve into molecule by molecule, and those atoms sort of rejoin the universe. And maybe they can link up together, with other molecules of people or spaces that were important to them, but they're not, thinking, sort of thinking conscious beings in the way that they would have been. That's how I think of the church doors too.
Yeah.
You're kind of rejoining the universe, but in a subliminal and
more of a
in just
cosmic
sort of,
way.
Yeah, in a cosmic way.
Yeah.
So life maybe continues, but not as we know it, would be my take on it.
Yeah.
The Sawyer-Juliet scene, I know we talked about how it's the best, but like, the thing that really struck me watching it this time was watching Elizabeth Mitchell's face, having this realization, like, Sawyer is just, Sawyer is happy and he's like so full of love. She almost looks like, it almost looks to me like at first it's like she's so happy it's painful, like she can't even take it. Like she has this look of hurt on her face almost, because I think she's remembering, oh God, I died. It was tragic. We didn't get to spend our lives together. And she's happy to be back with Sawyer, but it's also bringing back this hurt. But then it's almost like finally the happiness gets the better of her. And after she works through the pain, this big smile sweeps across her face, which is when we get "Kiss Me, James, You Got It, Blondie," which is a perfect moment. So I would definitely say, like, if you haven't done this before, watch that scene, everybody, and just focus on her face, and you sort of see her going through a range of things as she gets to that point of being able to just be happy to be with Sawyer again.
Yeah.
And I'll never get over that scene.
The other one-on-one I want to talk about is Ben and John. When both of them are kind of in full awareness and they meet outside the church, and Ben apologizes to John and says, "You were special, but I wasn't," which is sort of a full circle moment harkening back to season 3. And John forgives him, and Ben sort of takes that. And before we get too far into the scene, I do want to play, I think this might be our final hot take of the episode, from a listener just about John in this scene.
Hi, Sammy and Rosie. This is John from Montreal. Big fan of the podcast, and I absolutely adore the Lost series finale. But I do have one major nitpick/hot take, and it's about Locke's sideways arc generally and his final scene with Ben specifically. I can't dig into disability studies or social models of disability in a short hot take, but I think it's fair to say that, as with a lot of TV, Lost doesn't always get stories about disability right. For example, one of the most common disability stereotypes in media is of disabled people as tragic, pitiable victims because of disability. And while that's certainly not always the case with Locke, his arc does sometimes veer a bit too close to this kind of stereotype, with, in my view, the sideways ultimately fumbling what I think the rest of his arc had been building toward. So my hot take is that in his final scene with Ben, which I otherwise really loved, when Ben says, "I don't think you need to be in that chair anymore," I wish Locke had turned to him and said something like, "It was never about the chair, Ben," because it wasn't. And until the final season, I felt like Lost had been making that clear. Locke's problem was that he was a sad, pathetic, broken man, but broken in spirit, well before he ever became a wheelchair user. Locke was, like all the characters, lost and yearning for meaning, and he always wanted more, to be more, and I just wish that his conversation with Ben had demonstrated that he'd internalized the lessons of the show. That it wasn't really about his ability to walk or not, but about whether he was happy and had found community love and meaning. That, to me, doesn't require a triumphant standing up over disability. It just required him to learn to love himself and to heal his brokenness, his other kinds of brokenness, in other ways. His wheelchair use in the sideways was, in my view, incidental. Thanks so much for the podcast.
I think this helps me understand some of the discomfort I've been feeling with this plotline. All season, just the idea that Locke needs to be fixed and that Jack needs to fix him, and that is... I'm uncomfortable with it as a metaphor. I'm also uncomfortable with it literally, but I like John's solution here, like the idea that Locke's disability was never his problem. His problem that he was, John uses the word broken in spirit, right? That he didn't know what his life was for and didn't have a sense of purpose and didn't feel that he was contributing anything to the world. I mean, that was always the problem. I like the idea that he could have simply said, like, dude, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I found my
agree
purpose.
with that. It's obviously supposed to be a metaphor, but I agree that it's at best clunky in retrospect, and could have been handled a little bit better here, even if this was the direction they were still going to go. So I agree with that as well. Despite that, it's a gorgeous sequence. These guys know that these are the last words they're going to be saying to each other, and they just pack them with as much meaning as they can.
Yeah.
Because it's a simple scene.
Yeah.
It's very simple. There's nothing like that deep or nuanced about this. But it's powerful. I don't know how else to say it.
So I think that's actually a really good moment of transition into our conversation with Jack Bender, where, Sammy, you and he really get into the details of filming that final scene and who was where and what came from where and what was spontaneous.
Yeah, I agree. For the first and last time, we started with Jack Bender. Let's close out the show with Bender too. Why don't we?
Let's do it.
One last note that we should say before getting into Bender here. Spoilers ahead for the Sopranos finale. Just so if you haven't seen the Sopranos finale and still intend to someday, kind of spoils the end of that pretty good. So just be on the lookout. Do you remember getting the script for the first time for the finale? And yeah? Uh-huh. What do you remember?
I remember being moved by it. And I remember thinking, I think
this is going to piss off some people because I think they're looking for a really splashy reveal. Not, the CIA, the moment, this.
Yeah, but you remember reading it and thinking it's just perfect.
I think I knew that's what we were going for, and I found it to be incredibly moving. And for me, like with Stephen King, I'm much more interested in the monster inside the characters than the monster in the woods. Even though you need both sometimes, and he writes both.
I was going to say, and this isn't a criticism, but there were times when you did reveals on the show that were really powerful, but I think a lot of the times when you just went and answered a question that people wanted the answer to it wasn't that satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember in the sixth season there was the explanation of what the whispers were, that the whispers were the dead, you did that with Harold Perrineau.
Yeah.
It just felt like checking a box, It felt like I wasn't actually that interested in that.
Well, that's why David Chase's finale of The Sopranos is genius.
Right.
Blacking out.
Yeah.
And I had gotten back from where I was shooting something. It might have been Mr. Mercedes. No, it was before that.
Well before, yeah.
And everyone told me the finale was great. But nobody, thankfully, in my circle told me that the TV blanks and goes black. And I'm watching the scene and the tension's building and it goes off, and my first reaction, like everyone in the audience, was, "Are you kidding me? My TV goes out. Wait. And then I went, "Oh, David, you're a genius." Because the answer just would have been satisfied. Does he die? Does he get killed? Does he this? Does he that? I knew it. I didn't know it. How could he kill him? And it's not about pleasing the most number of people. It's just leaving it to the audience was brilliant.
The last moments of Lost, since we're on the subject of last moments, with Jack laying down with Vincent one more time and closing his eye, I guess I'm just I have a couple questions about it, but what do you remember about filming that?
I was very moved.
Yeah.
And I wanted it to be the last thing we shot. But it couldn't be because we had to end up on the stage, and that's one of the technical things where you want your last week of shooting to get all the trucks there and everything, so the wrap isn't forever. So that was something Gene Higgins proposed because we were trying to do the location thing with him in the jungle last. Mm. And we just couldn't. So I said, okay, that's fine. And the last thing we shot was Terry and Matthew up in the water where Matt was going to go down. Jack was going to go down or something. And
lowering him into the waterfall thing. Okay, yeah.
That was the last thing we shot, was the shots up on them. And, yeah.
Okay, but the filming of Jack laying down, I think Gene said she was crying during that scene.
Who, Gene?
Yeah.
Yeah, we all were. It was very moving. And the one thing, it's a good segue to Gene, because Gene and I also batted heads at times. When I started Lost, I was and she had done the pilot as a UPM, and was very responsible for crazy things like being able to get a plane and putting it on the beach and all this stuff. Everybody said, you can't do that. Gene's a master of doing things that can't be done and pulling it off. And I think she's one of the unsung heroes of Lost. Which is why I'm singing her praises now. But I will say that I was younger. I was more insecure. I was less trusting of everyone around me and feeling like I had to achieve it, know the most, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And so the point I'm making is that, and I felt the weight of when JJ first showed me the pilot and said, I want you to run it in Hawaii. And I knew we were going to continue to work together because we already had, and I was here doing Alias while he was off doing the pilot of Lost. And tell me if I said this, but he sent me the pilot, which I watched with Laura, my wife, Sophie and Hannah, my daughters. And I'm sitting there watching this thing, intimidated as heck, going, this is so brilliant, and there's no way I can keep up the scope of this every week, the action of this every week. on the positive side, I was watching something that I thought was brilliant and unique, and I hadn't seen an ensemble of fresh, multi-ethnicity actors since ER. And I said, wow, part of me really wants to do this, and part of me is really scared that I'm going to blow it. So when it was over, they looked at me and said, well, I guess you're going to Hawaii. And I went, well, no, wait a minute. And I dragged my heels. Because out of insecurity that I don't know that I can pull this off. Once I decided to do it, and Damon and JJ convinced me, and everybody else, and Brian Berkey. In fact, it was funny. Berkey even brought photographs to dinner at Toscana of the temple in Oahu, knowing Laura had just become a rabbi. And he said, she could be the rabbi there. In any case, thank God I decided to do it. And, the second episode was Walkabout, where we really found the show. And it was really good. And I kept saying, okay. So the point, I don't even know how I brought that up. Jean and I met. Jean, God love her, has a justifiable ego. She was there before I was, having done the UPM of the pilot. And she and I, it was a little oil and water the first season. And there were still arguments we had. But they were creative and good arguments. And I think at the end of the day, we always called each other, we're the mom and dad of this show. At the end of the day, we, I think, love and respect each other. But she took some grief from some of the actors, as did I.
What did she take grief for?
Well, schedule-wise. What do you mean we have to, work on Saturday? And we didn't often. But boy, season 2, when we had to pick, I was running behind on the sequence, and I needed to pick up some scenes on a Saturday, part day, and they sat in the tent and gave me shit. And I went, guys, we're here doing our show, and we don't do this often. And Jean took a lot of crap at times, too, from them. I think we all felt, whoever we were then, as people, the pluses and minuses. And God knows I've only gotten better as a person and as a producer and as a director since then. But I think we were all, it was like the Myth of Sisyphus. We were pushing, Evangeline and I talked about it. We were pushing this boulder up the hill to try to make this show wonderful. And it was hard work. And until we found out, okay, we got to keep going, but we know we're there in that we're on the right path. We're doing something that's working. And then it eased up season after season a little bit. But that first year, none of us knew. And I really didn't want to be the guy who blew this brilliant pilot. So there was insecurity and brilliant work from everybody. But it was at times, and we were on our own little island. And then suddenly it became this amazing thing for everybody. And then it all sort of turned around, but that's that history.
By the time you got to the end, were you ready to go and move on? Or
yeah,
you were.
We all were. And I was asked to do another show there. And I went, no thanks. I didn't want to follow Lost, still being there with another show. And it was the right decision, but we were all ready to move on.
I meant to ask that in the last scene with Jack lying down, the last shot of him closing his eye, do you remember if that was right out of the script or something you decided to do to mirror the first shot of the show?
I can't remember which came first, the chicken or the egg, the script or my thought. But it probably was. We wrote those eyeballs opening as part of the signature of the show, season 1, and then we dropped it. I was never the biggest fan of the eye opening. It worked in the pilot, but I didn't know that I wanted to start every shot because I said, at one point we're going to have Vincent, his eye open. And we never did, but that was my ongoing
it obviously worked there at the end.
Yeah.
Full circle.
Oh, yeah, no. And very much I wanted to emulate those shots. that JJ had done.
Oh, those opening, right, with Jack lying back down and Vincent, kind of the opposite.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You mentioned earlier, and just want to go back to it because it's such an important scene, the scene in the church with Jack and Christian, with Matt and John Terry.
Yeah.
You mentioned the stained glass. I guess I just hoping you could just talk about what you recall from filming that scene in that room, because it was just a couple of you. I think Gene told us you didn't let anyone in. You didn't know. Nobody knew what was in the script. What was it like in that room?
Sacred. And that was the moment when I was shooting that scene. I think I'd rehearsed it. And I saw what Matt was going to bring to the party, and John. And, because I knew I didn't want it to be sentimental. I just wanted it to be heart-wrenching and real. And that's when I walked around the stage going, this is happening. This is the end of this. And I can get emotional thinking about it now because I did that day, and that scene was so beautiful that it was beautiful on the page and was beautiful. And I knew, Damon lost his father at a young age, and I just knew where it all came from and what it was, and it was sacred is the appropriate word without being pretentious. Because I do think there's a difference between art and life, and life comes first. But
they come pretty close.
And they're both to be taken very seriously, I think, if you care. And that's another thing about Jane. She and I were both passionate about the show, and we both brought everything we could to the show. But I would piss her off, not intentionally. But one weekend I wanted a dog, so we went, my daughter and I, who was working as a PA on the show, who's now a writer and a brilliant writer. She was the world's worst PA. And Jean knew it. And it annoyed Jean.
Hannah or Sophie?
Sophie.
Okay.
And Hannah was helping in wardrobe, and now she's a costume designer. And we made Roland the costume designer.
Oh yeah, we had him on the show, Roland Sanchez, yeah. Great guy.
I made him a costume designer. He was an assistant.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so Sophie was, God love her, she laughs about it all the time. And it annoyed Jean because Jean knew Sophie was terrible PA. And Sophie and I go to the pound and we pick out this dog, Lulu. Sophie names Honolulu Lulu. She's this Airedale mutt, skinny, scrawny, beautiful dog. And I had this convertible Lexus, and I go drive. Jean's outside. In those days, she smoked with Pat music. Pat, our under Jean, she was her partner. I called him partner in crime, but she was great, and she was a UPM for Spielberg, and she was great. So, and they were always, So Jean's outside smoking as she did. I drive up, and their heads turn and look at me. And Lulu is standing in the back seat, convertible. Sophie's next to me. And I see them look, and I go, oh, Sophie, they're not pleased. And she said, oh, it's okay. And I said, yeah, I'll figure it out. So we get out of the car, and Lulu goes running around the offices, pees in Jean's office. And then I hear the next day that our contract with the state of Honolulu, state of Hawaii, is no dogs on the studio premises. And that was real. And Jean wasn't too upset to tell me that. So Laura, my wife, says, put her in the show. She'll be an actor. And I went, that's genius. So that pissed Jean off more, although we laugh about it now.
So that's how Lulu ended up playing the role of Vincent? Or
whatever it was, Lulu, no, wasn't
not
Vincent.
Okay.
No, not Vincent. No. That was a Golden who wasn't trained.
Got it.
This was, Lulu was just like an extra who was around in many, many scenes. And Matt Fox, who grew up with hunting dogs and all these fantastic dogs, just said, she's the mangiest, horrible-looking dog. And it was an ongoing joke. But Lulu would always be on the set. And then they wrote an article about Honolulu Lulu, and she knew all the secrets of Lost. And we're doing this one scene, season 4, I think, or 3, where Ian Somerhalder, I think, dies. And Foxy's not the one where he's in the cave doing the amputation of the leg, but another thing where it's a flashback with John Terry, where Foxy is doing surgery in front of his father, and he gets freaked and intimidated. It's a big moment. And we have a set, and Lulu comes on the set because she was always around, and she just comes wandering over to me and pet her, and everybody loved her. Next thing I know, we're doing a take, and Matt's close up, and we're doing a take, and he's operating and looking at his father, and it's a lot of acting and concentration. And I go, where's Lulu? And I look off, and I see Lulu just walking through the doors onto the set, the operating room doors. And I went, holy fuck.
She's in the shot.
She walks in, walks in, and suddenly I hear, fucking Lulu! What are you doing in here? This is an operating room. Get your fucking dog. Oh my God. So that was the story. But Jean, the end of Jean thing, she and I ended up being good friends, and I would work with her in a second, and we'd do great together because she's great at her job. It's just I certainly will take credit for my issues, and she had her own.
Do you remember talking with, whether with Jean or with anyone else, I guess, do you remember talking about or thinking about how are fans going to react to the finale, or what are people going to think about this, or is that not?
I think we thought more about that with the Flash. Sideways. The one where we got to go back, Jack.
Oh, the flash forward. Flash forward. Okay.
We have to go back when we shot that scene, which was a struggle. That scene between her and Jack. Evie was not as comfortable getting furious as she was getting emotional.
Interesting.
And we argued about it on the set. I said, just get back in the car and do it again. I did it. Do it again. And I got her angry. And she got out and said, blah, blah, blah. She yelled at him. It was great. But I think we were more worried about and expecting the audience to go crazy with that moment.
Because that's interesting, because that's the most iconic scene of Lost. I mean, people love that moment, whereas then the finale turned out to... Were you surprised by the reaction to the finale, that it was so divisive?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I was. In fact, I don't know if it was Jimmy Kimmel, who's hilarious, and was a real fan of Lost. He and, who was it? Okay, I can't remember.
You think of another late night host?
Yeah, no, it was Jimmy Kimmel, but he and whatever. So, but Jimmy Kimmel, I think, said, or maybe it was the other guy. I never watched Late Night. But Jimmy Kimmel, I think, said, after the Mueller report came out, right? He said, the Mueller report came out, and he said, I haven't been disappointed waiting for the Mueller report since the end of Lost. And I went, oh, shit, really? Yeah, so there you have it. But yeah, I think we were surprised by the vitriol, even though we all stood behind it and believed it. I think at that point Damon turned off his internet stuff and took a trip and came back and whatever. Yeah. But I believe in it to this day.
At this point, I mean, I'm pretty plugged into just the Lost community by virtue of doing this podcast, and I think that the people who didn't like it have basically just moved on at this point. There's still a really thriving community of people who love the show and love the finale. They stick around. They listen to our podcast, other podcasts. They have Facebook fan groups. It's regardless of however many people may not have liked it, there's a pretty thriving community of people who did, which is nice to see.
Great. They should.
One thing we haven't talked about, the music and Giacchino. I guess it's on my mind with the finale because I think that track that he wrote, Moving On, for the church sequence is just a beautiful. I mean, I listen to it sometimes. It's totally beautiful. I'm curious with the finale in particular, with the show as a whole. Did you ever talk with him? Were there moments where you were trying to, work with him or help him or do anything?
I think Damon and Carlton, because I didn't dub the show.
You didn't dub the show.
I was in Hawaii. I would get cuts and make notes on cuts with Damon and Carlton, and sometimes we'd agree, sometimes we wouldn't agree. But I left the dubbing to them, and in fact, I remember the track in Exodus where the raft goes off, and I added that moment and surprised Damon and Carlton with Vincent swimming after, which I'm very proud of.
It's a great moment.
Being a dog lover, obviously. And I had, in my rough cut, I had put in James Taylor singing The Water Is Wide, which is a gorgeous song. And it's a perfect song for that moment if you're going to do a song. And Damon and Carlton saw it, loved it. In fact, JJ was visiting in Hawaii, and I showed him the cut of it, and he flipped out. But everyone thought Chiquino would score it, which was the right choice. And I remember hearing that going, wow, that's big. That's a big movie moment.
I know that track. It's a good track.
Yeah. That's a big movie moment. So, Chiquino is brilliant. And we were mutual fans of each other, and hello, how are you, and at awards things and this and that. But we never said, no, I never gave him a note on anything. Because not only was it brilliant, but he, Damon and Carlton, if there were ever notes, they communicated.
The one thing we haven't talked about with the finale is all of the sort of action sequences happening on the island. There's the fight with Matt and Terry on the cliff.
Oh my God. Did Gene talk about that?
I've heard the story about the stabbing, the accidental stabbing that took place.
With the wrong knife. There was no stabbing, thank God.
Yeah, right.
It was just a dulled but real knife.
Yeah.
That would catch the glint of the sun. And he had a pad on, a metal pad. So that when Foxy hit him, it was by mistake in that angle, not the fake knife, but the dulled real knife.
Right.
But thankfully it hit him in where it was supposed to.
Yeah. I was just wondering if you had any particular recollections of all the physical stuff that you had to do. Because the island is falling apart. It's crazy.
First of all, when we scouted that location, Gene was very concerned. My attitude always was, and still is to this day, no one gets hurt doing a movie. But there were a couple of moments where we sort of shot in locations and did certain things that you wouldn't do anymore. And not necessarily even gunfire after that tragedy, but not on, rust. But Gene looked at that location and said, this we really have to think about. Because we were high up on that cliff and the access to it wasn't easy. And I just said, I think for the scope of the show, it's really important unless you decide we can't do it. Really, we can't jeopardize. And at the end of the day, she said, if we're careful, and you're careful, and we laid out what the shots were, we could do it. Plus, I wanted the helicopter shots, the big shots that Gene shot in the helicopter with our camera operator.
Yeah, she talked about that.
Yeah, those shots Gene did that are brilliant and add a lot to the scene. But it was tricky to be up there, and whenever there's water around, the rocks are slippery. And I remember the moment where Matt, I had to run him, and he leaps at Terry. And there was a little rise in the rocks. And I don't know how far it was then to the cliff. But we were all at the cliff. Matt runs, stunts. Matt, everybody said, yeah, we can do this. I just was worried about him leaping the 3 feet down, slipping. It wasn't necessarily slip and slide, but anything can happen. You can miss your step and roll over there. So we had our whole guardrail of people and actual, I think, a rail. And I remember going, okay, don't overdo it, Matt, be careful, which he did brilliantly. But it was arduous, it was tricky, and we had to be really careful.
Did you also do the sequence where Matt pulled out the big plug from the ground, or put the plug back into the...
Yes.
I assume that was on a set.
Yes.
That
was probably in the pool.
Okay, that was a funky set.
Yeah. Funky bad.
I didn't say that, but it was a little bit off.
Yeah, I don't remember.
That's okay.
It might have been just the pieces we put together and the fact that part of it was in a pool with walls that were supposedly whatever was in that plug or whatever the hell was going on.
Last question.
Yeah.
On the season 6 DVD, the sort of mini little episode was included on there, The New Man in Charge, which was about Hurley and Van running the island together.
Mm-hmm.
Were you involved with that?
I think so.
Do you remember?
It might have been shot. Was it only shot for the DVD?
Yes, it's only on the DVD.
I know, but was it a real scene we shot and cut out?
I assumed it is, because it's got Emerson and Jorge Garcia and Malcolm.
Well, we did a little vignettes for... It wasn't MTV.
Oh, yeah, those little pieces, the 13 little... Okay.
Those little things. We did that for publicity in the internet because we were the first show on the iPod.
Yeah.
And so we did those. I shot those, and they were kind of a pain in the ass because, you're making for that big.
Yeah.
And yet it's a real scene.
I watched those. They were good.
Yeah, it was a real scene. And we're going, really?
Yeah. Do you remember how you celebrated when it was all over, when you finished the last shot or the last edit?
Of the show?
Of the show, yeah.
We were at the studio, I think it was 1 a.m, and I was doing that last shot I described.
Looking up at Matt and Terry, looking down the waterfall.
The fake waterfall.
Yeah.
And it was a type 2 shot after, because we had shot all the other big shots. And we did 1 take, 2 take, and it wasn't, and I said, okay, print that, I can't say rap. Let's do it again.
Oh, you couldn't bring yourself
Yeah,
to say
Laura
it.
was next to me, Jean was there.
Laura was there with you?
Huh?
Laura was there with you?
She was there, yeah,
Wow.
for the end of the show, as was my Peter Benedict, my still friend and agent. And I just couldn't say rap. And then I think after 4 takes, I said, okay, I have to say it, rap. And everybody applauded, hugged. Matt came down and gave me a hug and said, you're an artist. I said, you too. Terry. And yeah.
If it had to be 2 guys with you at the end, those are the guys. That was their show more than anyone.
Well, that's right. That's why I think Gene might have come up with that at the end, saying, okay, well, what about if we do that last? Mm-hmm. Whatever it was a hell of a way to end. And being at the stage. But I'm not good at saying goodbye. And I do the Irish exit. The rap party for Lost. Not the one that Evangeline did, which was the rap party of all rap parties. You heard about that at Cool?
Everyone references it, and no one wants to tell me what happened at it.
I'm just saying there were white tents and luscious food and great stuff, and Jimmy Buffett came.
Oh yeah, I heard the Jimmy Buffett
shows.
story. Yeah.
The whole thing was extraordinary, but the rap party for the entire crew was at the Kualoa, the hotel, where I lived in a condo for a while. And in any case, everybody was downstairs in the big restaurant. We had taken it over. I was sitting upstairs with Laura and a few friends. I said, I don't want to go down there. And they said, I think Sophie was with us. It was the end of that. No, it wasn't the end of that season. But Laura said, you got to go down. Make the circle. I find it, Laura always said, I'm only comfortable with a group of adults if I'm directing, honestly, because then I love it. And she says, you're in control. I said, well, not just that, but the purpose. We're all making this together. It's so invigorating and great. But you put me in a party with a bunch of people, dinner party, small group, I'm fine. If there's a dog, I'll go with the dog, or I just am not that comfortable. especially with a group of people that I've intimately worked with for so long. And I basically took me a half an hour to go through the whole room and grab and say and blah, blah, blah. And then I went upstairs without saying goodbye and just hung out with them. I said, I just can't do it. It's not good. And to this day, that's true. You know, love you all. Wrap. See you. See you again.
Well, then I won't say goodbye. I'll say thank you for reliving this with us and going back.
Actually, it was very emotional, so I appreciate it. I literally thought I wasn't going to be able to, you know, add much. But it was to revisit it with you, and I know how much you respect the show. So it was very pleasurable. Thank you.
I don't know if this is or isn't true, but every time we speak to somebody about the filming of this episode and they talk about how emotional it was for them, I think, you know, that just travels out through my screen and right into my eyes. And I don't know if that's just tremendous acting or if that emotion really can come through like that, but it certainly feels that way.
It does, and I was so touched by his story that he couldn't bring himself to say wrap at the end because the idea of letting go. I mean, that's what you're talking about, right? Letting go. It's so hard. And even for them making the show, and they put so much time and effort into it, and they just, were, probably ready to be done in so many ways. Like, no, let's do it again. Let's do it again. There's one more take. I get it. I really get it.
You and I have talked about that with this podcast, right? That it's just like, on one hand, we want to have other creative pursuits that come after this. On the other hand, like, it's hard to end. It's hard to end something and hard to feel like you ended it right. And how much larger in scale must that feeling be when something has essentially been your entire life for 6 years? Like,
I don't know, I think our podcast is similar in scale. No, it's hard. It's really, really hard to imagine what it must have been like. It was interesting to me, his comment that they were more worried about what fan reaction to the end of season 3 was for the flash forward reveal than they were to the finale of the show.
Which is interesting because I think the finale of season 3 is perfect. And I think a lot of fans
I think it's the highlight. And a lot of people feel like that was the high point. So I don't know. It's I guess it's so hard to know how people will react to stuff.
Yeah. Well, and we talked a lot about sort of the difficulty of ever satisfying the audience for something like this, who it's such a large audience, it has such a different level of interest and engagement with the show and things that make the show work for them, and it was always an impossible task.
They did a great job. I mean, the fact that, all these years later, there's we see it. I'm in the Facebook fan groups. We get our hot takes. We see it on Twitter. We see the listener numbers for the podcast. Like, the show has a large, dedicated fan base still of people who loved it the whole way through. And, we all have our problems. You and I, do critical hot takes every week. But the fact that this community still exists in the way that it does, I think speaks to, how they created something of really lasting value and emotional import that goes beyond whatever the arguments were of the day about was this living up to expectations or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what do you think that's about? What do you think are the lasting themes of Lost that keep it relevant? What feels relevant to you watching this back now 15 years later?
Well, this is the big stuff of, science and faith and, fate and free will and spirituality and all that and good and evil. But it's funny, for me personally, I was just thinking a lot about life and death.
Yeah.
Watching this finale. I know that some people don't feel this way and I envy them, but for me, death is really scary as a concept. And so my gosh, when the Ben and Locke scene, I have a note here when Locke says to Ben, "Goodbye, Ben," just before walking in, it hit me so hard, the idea of saying goodbye to someone for what is going to be the last time. And just clearly not being scared of it and feeling so comfortable with it because you've lived your life and you can accept that that's gone now. It's so hard for me to even imagine that because that's such a scary concept of just that of letting go completely and knowing that it's the end. It's I don't know, the show brings an amazing grace to that topic and a real beauty to representing what that can look like. and how that can look positive and feel less scary. That's what resonates with me watching this again. It really does a lot for me, because that is so hard for me to grapple with that stuff.
Yeah.
What about for you? I mean, what is it for you that really that really stays with you, and you think will stay with you even as we move on from this podcast?
Yeah, I think it's the idea that we have so much latitude in our earthly lives, such as they are, or our island lives, to change, and to change continually. And it doesn't have to be linear. It's okay if we revert to our old, shittier selves sometimes. And, I mentioned earlier that I have, as I've gotten older, felt like I identify with Jack a lot more. And the idea that I can be a force for good and help lead people and help influence people for the better, and also fail in very real ways and have that be okay, and have none of those failures be cataclysmic even when they feel that way. I mean, I'm, Lord willing, I am never in a position where I am considering detonating a nuclear bomb. But
I sure hope not.
But yeah, I mean, with Sawyer and with Kate and Sayid and these characters who mean a lot to me, who were very deeply lost and were able to, find people and learn to trust people and to move forward on that journey. I'm getting emotional. That's really meaningful to me.
I think that loss offers a lot of things for a lot of people. I think that frankly, it's amazing that they were able to build such deep and beautiful concepts and stories into a show that was, on the surface, a mystery about an island, right?
That was also doing things like the Blast Door map and the Dharma Initiative and
right.
Time travel.
It's incredible that they accomplished that together. Talking about going, these people being there to support each other and going on this journey together. I mean, we've been doing that with our listeners the last 6 years, right? I mean, it's certainly been fun for you and me just to, chat and gab and interview people from Lost, but what has made this truly worthwhile is knowing that so many of you are out there, with us on this adventure and tuning in week by week and sending us comments and telling us what you think. We've gotten so many nice notes the last couple months as we've gotten towards the end here. We're so touched and so deeply moved that you've wanted to be here with us, even as these podcasts have gotten longer and more unruly as we've gone on. So thank you for giving us the desire and the fuel, I guess I would say, to keep going.
Yeah, and just thank you so much for engaging with us and leaving voicemails and chatting with us on Twitter and on leaving YouTube comments. Like, the internet can be a harsh place sometimes, and this has just been such a community of people who are really thoughtful. And it's so wonderful to be able to just get into the weeds on some of these subjects and, come out the other side knowing that we are all here because it's meaningful to us. That's been really, really delightful. So thank you all for coming on this journey with us, and we're glad that it was meaningful to you, because it was certainly, very meaningful to us.
Let me say one more thing, just to sort of maybe try to tie together your and my, two thoughts here on what makes this so meaningful. I mean, this is going to go back to the Jack and Christian scene, of course, which I think is the only proper place to end a podcast about Lost. The whole idea that it's okay to fail, that it's okay that we're not perfect, that we have to learn lessons, that we have to try and try again to continually, become our best selves. The idea that death is scary, and yet we somehow have to, find a way to confront that and become comfortable with it. It really is as Christian says to Jack, it's the people in our lives, it's the people that we surround ourselves with, that we spend our most meaningful moments with, who make that possible across all those fronts. It's those people who make it possible to accept our own failings, who make it possible to accept our own need for improvement and to accept the inevitability of what's coming for us. I mean, I'm looking back at, Christian's dialogue, and Jack, he struggles with the idea that he's dead. He asks, they're all dead? And Christian says, everybody dies sometimes, kiddo. Jack's realization at the beginning of this scene, he asks, how are you here right now? Christian asks, how are you here? And Jack has to, this is what he really has to accept. I died too. It's so hard for him to accept that and to be at peace with that. And Christian says, this is the place you all made together so that you could find one another. That's why all of you are here. Nobody does it alone. You needed all of them, and they needed you. They needed each other to become the people they were supposed to be, that they could be. They needed each other in this moment now to move on together and to accept the sort of scary fate that was in front of them. And, you know, not that that sums up everything about Lost, but I think it gets to the most important stuff. I think it gets to why there's still this, you know, this community around Lost. Not that we all don't have our own communities and our own lives that have nothing to do with this show, but I think it's beautiful that a show that had this message has created this fan community that is still is in so many ways, again, because we've seen it out there, that is still conversing and dialoguing and, you know, drawing lessons out of this. I think that it's really perfect that Lost has created that.
Yeah, I agree.
As we said earlier, this will not be the very, very last time you'll hear from us. We're gonna do one more episode. We're gonna do something on the new man in charge. Details to come. We might try to do something a little special surrounding it, TBD. But you know, look out on our social media for you know, information when that's gonna happen.
Yeah, and then, you know, after that, who's to say? Keep the hatch in your feed, and I don't know what comes next, but
we're not promising anything. But you know, if Matthew Fox finally next week, if his rep says, hey, by the way, he's willing to talk to you about Lost after all these years, I promise you we'll come back and we'll do another one with that.
Exactly. Special occasions. So yeah, I mean, we know, we hear from listeners who are finding the hatch for the first time all the time. So if you are so inclined, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you're listening.
We'll continue to monitor our social media as well, even after we come out with the New Man in Charge podcast. Again, Twitter at The Hatch Podcast, Facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast. I'll check in on the YouTube comments too, so please feel free to continue to leave your thoughts there. We promise we will continue to love to hear from you, even if we stop releasing regular podcasts.
Our theme music is by Andy G. Cohen, and our cover art is by Danny Ross.
Normally here we would say we'll be back next week or the week after. Not sure exactly when that'll be with that last one, but how about we say our final word together? Namaste.